In the early years of the Second World War, military planners across the world understood the importance of mobility, but few truly anticipated the scale at which logistics would define modern warfare. When the United States entered the war in 1941, the Army faced a critical question: how to equip a rapidly growing force with a reliable vehicle capable of transporting troops, ammunition, food, fuel, and supplies across diverse terrain. The result of that challenge was the GMC CCKW 212-ton truck, a vehicle that would later become inseparable from the story of the Red Ball Express. But in its earliest days, this truck was far from celebrated. Many mechanics, officers, and drivers considered it underpowered, unremarkable, and even worthless for the demands of war. Before the Normandy landings, U.S. motor pool mechanics who inspected early production CCKWs questioned whether the truck could endure the heavy loads and constant use required in a global conflict. Its 212-ton rating seemed modest when compared to European trucks built before the war, some of which boasted stronger frames or larger engines. Many assumed the CCKW would struggle under severe battlefield conditions, particularly in mud, uneven roads, and harsh winter weather. Even within the Army, officers doubted whether the truck could match expectations for long-range supply operations. It was seen as a basic transport vehicle, functional but not exceptional. Yet the concerns were understandable when viewed through the lens of the time. In 1940, the concept of a standardized, mass-produced military truck was still relatively new. Previous American conflicts did not rely on fast-moving mechanized logistics. The U.S. military was transitioning from a horse and rail supply system to fully motorized logistics. Many in the Army had never witnessed a war that demanded non-stop fuel, ammunition, and supplies delivered over hundreds of miles at high speed. In this context, the CCKW seemed more like a gamble than a guaranteed asset. The CCKW's design was the result of urgent wartime necessity. The U.S. government required a truck that could be built quickly, in massive numbers, and with interchangeable parts. It needed to serve in deserts, forests, mountains, snow, and ruined European roads. The chosen solution was a 6x6 all-wheel drive truck powered by a 270 cubic-inch GMC inline-six engine. It had a 5-speed transmission, dual-range transfer case, and could carry 212 tons of cargo on-road and 112 tons off-road. It was not the most powerful machine, but it was engineered for mass production, reliability, and ease of repair, qualities not immediately appreciated by those who worked on the first models. In workshops across the United States, mechanics who received early CCKWs in 1941 and 1942 examined them with skepticism. Many believed the engine lacked the torque needed for hauling military loads through mud or steep inclines. The wooden cargo bed used in early versions was criticized for absorbing moisture and warping in bad weather. Some felt the suspension was too light for battlefield punishment. The truck's rated capacity also misled some evaluators. They assumed its 212-ton limit was a sign of weakness, unaware that the U.S. Army had chosen the rating to preserve durability, not because of limited capability. In reality, the CCKW would eventually prove capable of carrying far more than its official limit when required. The skepticism extended beyond mechanical concerns. At the time, many military planners imagined supply operations would continue to rely heavily on railways, as they had in World War I. Trucks were considered secondary, meant for short-distance transport from rail depots to frontline units. No one foresaw that an entire supply chain might someday depend on convoys of trucks driving day and night at high speed, without rest, across newly liberated territory. Because of this mindset, some officers saw little need for a special truck. In their view, the CCKW was just another vehicle, not a future icon of wartime logistics. But events soon unfolded that would challenge every assumption about warfare and supply. When the United States began deploying its forces across the Atlantic, logisticians quickly discovered the immense difficulty of moving equipment through foreign ports, devastated roads, and battle-scarred regions. From North Africa to Sicily to mainland Italy, the U.S. Army learned firsthand that mobility was the deciding factor in modern war. Armies that could not move supplies, fuel, and ammunition lost momentum, and momentum often meant victory or defeat. By the time planning began for the invasion of Normandy in 1944, the U.S. had already shipped tens of thousands of CCKWs overseas. They formed the backbone of transport operations during the North African and Italian campaigns, but their defining test was still to come. The Allied invasion of France would become the moment that turned the CCKW from a doubted utility truck into a logistical legend. Yet in the months leading up to D-Day, those doubts had not fully disappeared. Some Allied commanders still believed railroads would resume supply duties soon after the initial landings, minimizing the role of truck convoys. June 6, 1944, the Normandy invasion reshaped all expectations. The destruction left behind by retreating German forces, combined with Allied bombing, meant French railways, bridges, and infrastructure were in ruins. Rail lines could not be restored fast enough to support the rapidly advancing Allied armies. Fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, and medical supplies needed to reach the front lines faster than ever before. Traditional supply methods were not sufficient. Suddenly, the CCKW was no longer just a transport truck. It became the only viable lifeline capable of sustaining an army of millions as it pushed across Western Europe. In the days following the Normandy landings, U.S. logistics officers assessed the emerging crisis. Without direct and continuous supply to the front, the advance would stall. Tank divisions could not operate without fuel. Artillery units could not fire without ammunition. Infantry needed food, medicine, and replacement equipment. Every mile the Allies advanced into France increased the strain on supply lines. What had been considered a manageable support function transformed into the most urgent operational priority of the European campaign. Thousands of CCKWs were assembled near Normandy's beaches, forming motor transport companies tasked with hauling supplies inland. At first, these convoys operated under no special system. They moved as needed, with varying speeds and routes. Roads became congested and supply flow remained inconsistent. But as the front expanded, Allied leadership realized the need for a dedicated high-speed supply highway that operated around the clock. This would become the Red Ball Express, a logistical innovation unlike anything seen before. And at the center of this transformation was the once underestimated GMC CCKW, the truck that many believed was too weak, too lightly built, or too ordinary, soon became the only vehicle capable of meeting the demands of a new kind of warfare. Its standardized parts allowed mechanics to repair broken trucks quickly. Its relatively light weight helped it navigate makeshift roads, muddy terrain, and temporary bridges. Its engine, while not the most powerful, proved reliable under constant strain. Most importantly, the CCKW could be produced by the tens of thousands, ensuring that the supply chain never ran short of vehicles. The early skepticism surrounding the CCKW gradually faded as its performance in France exceeded expectations. Drivers, mechanics, and commanders began to realize that the truck's design, once criticized, was in fact its greatest strength. The lightweight frame allowed for speed and flexibility. The standardized components meant less downtime and easier maintenance. The 6x6 drive system gave it off-road capability essential for bypassing destroyed infrastructure. The truck that some had dismissed as a temporary solution was becoming indispensable. By late summer 1944, the stage was set for a logistical effort that would change the course of the war and redefine how armies move. The Red Ball Express was ready to begin, and the CCKW would become its beating heart. When the Allied breakout from Normandy began in late July 1944, the speed of the advance took even senior planners by surprise. After weeks of fighting through the hedgerow country, American forces finally shattered German lines during Operation Cobra. The U.S. 1st and 3rd Armies surged forward, liberating French towns at a pace no supply system had ever been built to sustain. What had been calculated as a gradual push across France turned into a rapid offensive that threatened to outrun its own lifeline. Tanks, self-propelled guns, and support vehicles consumed extraordinary amounts of fuel. Patton's Third Army, known for its aggressive thrusts, often required more than 400,000 gallons of fuel per day to maintain momentum. Without a constant flow of supplies, the liberation of France could grind to a halt. By mid-August 1944, Allied forces had advanced so far from the landing beaches that supply depots struggled to keep up. The ports of Cherbourg and other coastal facilities were not yet fully operational. German demolition and Allied bombing had damaged railways extensively. France's interior infrastructure, bridges, tracks, locomotives, and rail yards, was either destroyed or under repair. A modern mechanized army could not pause and wait for train lines to be rebuilt. It needed a new solution that could function immediately, regardless of terrain or existing infrastructure. The answer would be a pioneering truck-based supply system, and the CCKW would be its core. On 25 August 1944, U.S. Army logistics officers formalized a plan to create a dedicated, high-speed route for trucks linking the Normandy supply depots to the advancing front. The system would operate continuously, day and night, with minimal stops and strict regulations to avoid delays or road congestion. To distinguish this critical supply route from regular traffic routes, it was marked with a red circle, similar to the symbol used by American railroads to denote priority freight. Soldiers soon began referring to it as the Red Ball route, and the truck operation that ran on it became the Red Ball Express. The system officially began on 25 August 1944 with approximately 67 truck companies. Within days, it expanded to over 132 companies, involving nearly 6,000 trucks at its peak. At the center of the fleet was the GMC CCKW-2 1-2-ton truck, supported by a smaller number of heavier 5-ton trucks and trailers. The CCKW was not selected because it was the most powerful vehicle, but because it was the one most suited to the demands of continuous mass-scale operation. It was reliable enough to run endless hours, simple enough to repair rapidly, and versatile enough to move through damaged terrain where heavier trucks might fail. The Red Ball Express operated along a system of one-way roads. Loaded trucks traveled east toward the front on designated routes, while empty trucks returned west on separate roads. This one-direction system prevented traffic jams and kept supply flow steady. Convoys typically consisted of 20 to 45 trucks, each spaced at intervals to reduce dust clouds, maintain visibility, and prevent collisions. Strict rules governed the convoys: no overtaking, no stopping, and no deviation from assigned routes. Military police manned intersections to keep traffic moving, while road signs marked with a red circle guided drivers day and night. The demands on the vehicles were immense. A typical CCKW assigned to the Red Ball Express could travel between 300 and 400 miles within a 24-hour cycle, often with minimal rest. Because of the urgency, drivers sometimes remained behind the wheel for 10 to 20 hours at a stretch. Maintenance crews worked continuously to keep trucks operating. Motor pools set up mobile repair points along the route, allowing broken vehicles to be quickly assessed, repaired, or cannibalized for parts. The standardized design of the CCKW made this possible. A part from one truck could fit another without modification. This reduced downtime and enabled mechanics to keep more trucks in service despite the punishing workload. By early September 1944, the Red Ball Express was delivering over 12,000 tons of supplies per day to the front lines. This included fuel, ammunition, rations, clothing, and spare parts. Fuel alone accounted for nearly half the load. Gasoline was transported in 5-gallon jerrycans, the standard U.S. Army fuel container, piled high in truck beds. Drivers loaded and unloaded countless cans daily. The CCKW, though rated for a 212-ton load, frequently carried far more. In practice, it was common for these trucks to haul 4 or even 5 tons when conditions demanded it. The vehicle proved it could endure loads well beyond expectations, disproving early skeptics who doubted its strength. The conditions the Red Ball drivers faced were challenging. Roads were often narrow, dusty, and congested. Bad weather turned dirt routes into mud traps. As the Allies advanced, the Red Ball route shifted repeatedly to remain close to operational supply depots or newly captured ports. In some sectors, trucks operated close to enemy lines, risking ambush or artillery fire. Accidents were common. Truck breakdowns occurred frequently due to overloading, constant operation, and rough terrain. Yet the CCKW remained surprisingly resilient. Even when heavily strained, it continued to run long enough to deliver its cargo, earning a reputation as a dependable workhorse. As more liberated ports came online, such as Antwerp later in the campaign, alternative supply routes gradually reduced pressure on the Red Ball system. But in the critical months following the Normandy breakout, the CCKW's performance was a decisive factor in sustaining the Allied advance. Without it, the speed of liberation would have slowed dramatically, possibly allowing German forces more time to regroup, fortify positions, or mount counterattacks. Instead, the steady flow of supply enabled continuous forward momentum. The Red Ball Express also revealed the importance of logistics as a strategic weapon. German commanders were often bewildered by the Allies' ability to maintain offensive pressure without pause. They were accustomed to warfare limited by fuel and ammunition shortages. The American emphasis on supply chain capacity represented a new paradigm in modern combat. The Red Ball Express was not simply a support operation. It was a strategic instrument that enabled mobile warfare on a scale previously unseen. Logistics officers gathered valuable insights from the Red Ball Express that shaped future operations. Standardized vehicle fleets simplified maintenance. Dedicated routes reduced congestion. One-way traffic systems improved efficiency. Predictable supply cycles enabled frontline units to plan operations confidently. The CCKW, initially dismissed as ordinary, had proven to be the ideal platform for implementing this new logistical model. By mid-October 1944, the Red Ball Express had delivered more than 412,000 tons of supplies, an achievement made possible by the endurance of the CCKW fleet. As the Allies captured new ports and rail lines were restored, the need for the Red Ball diminished. The operation officially shut down on 16th of November 1944, but its legacy remained, and the CCKW's reputation had been transformed. It was now recognized as a symbol of Allied logistical strength and ingenuity. The success of the Red Ball Express marked a turning point for the CCKW. No longer viewed as a modest utility truck, it became known as the Lifeline of the European campaign. Its performance shifted military thinking. Reliability, standardization, and ease of maintenance had proven to be more decisive than raw power. In a war where mobility and supply determined the pace of victory, the CCKW emerged as one of the most strategically important vehicles of the Allied arsenal. As 1944 drew to a close, a new phase of the war began. The Allies faced winter weather, renewed German resistance, and long operational distances. Yet the lessons learned from the Red Ball Express and the role of the CCKW would shape how the final push into Germany unfolded, and how post-war militaries would design their logistics systems for decades to come. By the end of 1944, the GMC CCKW had moved far beyond the shadow of the doubts that greeted its introduction. Once criticized as too light, too weak, or too ordinary for the demands of mechanized warfare, it had become the backbone of the most ambitious truck-based supply operation of World War II. With the closure of the Red Ball Express on 16th of November 1944, the truck's wartime journey was far from over. It would continue to prove its worth in the harshest winter Europe had seen in decades, in the intense fighting that followed, and in shaping the future of military logistics long after the war ended. As winter set in during late 1944, the Allied drive into Germany slowed. Bad weather, stretched supply lines, and determined German resistance tested logistics networks anew. In December, the German army launched its last major offensive on the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge. The surprise attack through the Ardennes created a sudden crisis. Units at the front urgently needed ammunition, fuel, winter clothing, medical supplies, and reinforcements. Once again, trucks became the primary means of keeping the front line supplied. Although conditions were harsher and the Red Ball Express had ended, the CCKW continued to play a central role. Snow, ice, and freezing temperatures made driving extremely hazardous. Engines struggled to start, roads became slick, and vehicles risked sliding off narrow forest routes. Nevertheless, the CCKW's robust engineering and adaptability allowed it to function when many vehicles could not. Mechanics improvised cold weather measures, such as adding anti-freeze mixtures, insulating fuel lines, and modifying tires for traction. The truck's relatively light weight compared to heavier transports reduced the chance of it becoming stuck in snow or mud. Its 6x6 drivetrain remained effective even in treacherous terrain, enabling it to deliver essential supplies to units engaged in intense winter combat. Following the Allied victory in the Ardennes, logistics once again became the driving force behind the final advance into Germany. As the war neared its end, the CCKW remained a constant presence, transporting soldiers, towing artillery, moving bridging equipment, and supporting engineering units rebuilding damaged infrastructure. It hauled liberated civilians, prisoners of war, refugees, and relief supplies in the chaotic months that followed Germany's collapse. By VE Day in May 1945, the truck had become a symbol of the Allied ability to sustain mobility under any condition. The scale of CCKW production was staggering. Between 1941 and 1945, more than 560,000 units were built, making it one of the most produced military trucks in history. This mass production was part of a broader industrial achievement known as the Arsenal of Democracy, American. Factories mastered assembly line techniques that allowed rapid manufacturing of standardized vehicles. This standardization gave the U.S. military a decisive logistical advantage and became a model emulated by other nations in the post-war era. After the war, the CCKW's impact extended far beyond the battlefield. The United States retained large numbers of these trucks, and many were distributed to Allied nations under reconstruction and military assistance programs. In Europe, CCKW supported the rebuilding of war-torn economies. They transported materials for reconstruction projects, delivered food and aid to devastated communities, and helped restore basic services. In France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, they served in civilian industries, agriculture, and public works. Many CCKWs found new life across the world. Through surplus sales and aid programs, thousands were shipped to Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, developing nations, which lacked industrial capacity to build large vehicle fleets, relied on surplus CCKWs for transportation, construction, and military needs. These trucks helped build roads, transport workers, carry crops to markets, and support infrastructure development. They also served in military forces of dozens of countries for decades after the war. In some regions, the CCKW remained in active service into the 1970s and 1980s, long after more modern designs had emerged. The legacy of the CCKW was also institutional. Military planners studied the lessons of the Red Ball Express and recognized the strategic importance of motorized logistics. The idea that supply networks could be mobile, flexible, and independent of fixed infrastructure became a cornerstone of post-war doctrine. The U.S. Army invested heavily in developing new generations of logistics vehicles. Successors to the CCKW, such as the M35 Deuce and a Half, adopted many of the same principles: durability, versatility, and standardized components. The M35 would itself go on to serve for over half a century, continuing the lineage of reliable 212-ton transport trucks. The concept of dedicated supply routes pioneered by the Red Ball Express inspired modern logistics planning. During the Korean War, motorized supply operations mimicked the Red Ball model, ensuring frontline units received continuous support in difficult terrain. In later conflicts, including Vietnam and the Gulf War, logistics planners applied lessons first tested in France in 1944: rapid deployment, modular supply units, and decentralized, flexible supply chain operations. The CCKW also had a cultural impact. Veterans who had driven, repaired, or relied on the truck during the war carried strong memories of it. Many spoke of the CCKW with a sense of respect, acknowledging that its reliability often made the difference between success and failure. It appeared in war memoirs, films, documentaries, and exhibitions about the Allied victory. It became a recognizable image of American involvement in WWII, second only perhaps to the Jeep and the Sherman tank. Yet unlike those combat-oriented vehicles, The CCKW's contribution was measured not in destroyed enemy equipment, but in sustained momentum, logistical resilience, and saved time. Historians often highlight that wars are not won by combat power alone, but by the ability to maintain that power through supply. The CCKW, once underappreciated, became physical proof of that principle. Its story demonstrated that innovation in logistics could be as decisive as innovation in weaponry. Without the steady flow of fuel, ammunition, and supplies, the Allies could not have maintained their rapid advance across Europe. Without a reliable vehicle fleet capable of constant use, the Red Ball Express could not have succeeded. The CCKW's triumph was not dramatic in the traditional sense. It was quiet, persistent, and tireless. Yet it was essential. Today, restored CCKWs can be seen in museums, military vehicle shows, and historical reenactments. Collectors and preservation groups maintain these trucks as symbols of an era when endurance and practicality defined wartime engineering. The sight of a CCKW driving along a parade route or displayed in a museum exhibit serves as a reminder of the truck's humble beginnings and remarkable journey. Once dismissed as inadequate, it earned a place among the most influential vehicles in military history. The story of the GMC CCKW is ultimately one of transformation. It began as a design questioned by many, underestimated by those who saw only its limitations. But when war demanded a vehicle capable of supporting a mobile army across a continent, it delivered beyond expectations. Through the Red Ball Express, it became the lifeline that sustained the Allied advance, proving that reliability, simplicity, and mass production could be as powerful as raw strength. Its legacy continues to influence logistics and vehicle design to this day. What started as a worthless truck became an indispensable tool in achieving victory, reshaping not only the outcome of a war, but the future of global military logistics.